Hi there, and welcome to another edition of Resistance TV. I'm delighted to welcome Becky Massey as our guest this evening. She helped to launch a new movement at the weekend to stop Starmer. Becky is a former member of the Labour Party who was expelled, I think it was in June 2020, for a tweet that she posted the previous November, I believe it was. The tweet basically said that I would work for the local people if I was re-elected as the Labour MP for Derby North at the 2019 general election, but obviously people weren't allowed to say nice things about me. I mean, there's a number of people who ended up being disciplined for that, and Becky was one of them for a fairly innocuous tweet. I mean, she posted that. I think it was just after the Labour NEC had dropped me as the official Labour candidate on the recommendation of Jenny Formby, who was Labour General Secretary at the time and was supposedly a left-wing ally of Jeremy Corbyn. Anyway, we all know that what subsequently happened and how Sir Keir Starmer blagged his way to the Labour leadership, and things have gone downhill ever since, which is why Becky and others have launched this group. So welcome to the show, Becky.
Hi, Chris. Good to see you.
Good to see you, mate. Thanks very much indeed. You're the personification of solidarity, comrade. So thank you.
Thank you
for your support for me personally, and just generally for your support for all the socialists and for that socialist agenda that everybody was so, or most people anyway, I think, were so inspired by when Jeremy became the leader of the party. But I just wondered maybe if you could start, Becky, by saying a bit more why the group was started. I mean, I've given a little bit of rationale for it, but just tell us in your words why the group was established.
Well, after the coup against Corbyn, which, I mean, you know more about than anybody, but I think many of us were burned during that coup, and the comprehensive takeover of the Labour Party by the right wing, I think the left has been struggling. You know, we know the Labour Party is dead. We know it's done for. But we haven't yet succeeded in a comprehensive way. So the left has had success in various areas like Liverpool, Newham, Tower Hamlets, and other places across the country, which is great. You know, they're very individualized movements, and really quite a few of us have been talking really since 2019 about what to do, where to go, how to manage things. And some of us thought with the looming election that in fact something that certainly unites us and seems to unite a lot of people across social media is Starmer and the absolute dislike of Starmer. And people don't like Starmer for very good reasons. And I can start on the litany of those reasons in a minute. But the idea of Stop Starmer is to firstly try and expose to people who Starmer is, where he came from, what he's done, and why he's done it. Because the mainstream media is all lined up behind Starmer. And if we don't start getting out into our communities and telling the truth about Starmer, he's kind of going to float into power on the back of the chaos of the Tory party. Yeah. And so we thought that Stop Starmer would be a campaign that could support whatever socialists were standing in any given area, you know, whatever name they come under in any given area. But the one thing that unites us is we know what Starmer is. Yeah. So that was the idea behind the campaign of Stop Starmer. Behind the campaign of Stop Starmer.
Tell us, because I'm sure if they haven't already, they will be saying this. I know I've certainly been accused of it, and you probably have as well. The various so-called centrists call us Tory enablers. How would you respond to that charge that this Stop Starmer campaign is basically a Tory enabling campaign?
Well, I'd answer it in two ways. Firstly, I'd say, well, that's rich coming from you. You know, the Tory enablers since 2015. The second point is more serious and less factional, really. It's, you have to look at the policies that Starmer is promoting. So he wants to keep the bedroom tax, keep the benefit cap on 2 children. He's ditched commitments on the environment. I mean, there's just such a list of things that he's ditched. You know, his Green New Deal and
commitments to renationalisation, isn't it?
5 missions. I don't know. Basically, everything that was Labour to benefit people, actual people, has been ditched. And it's been ditched in favour of a made-up fiscal rule. There's no such thing as a fiscal rule. It's just a term to maintain austerity. So I think anybody that would vote Labour at this point is enabling Tories. Because they're offering absolutely nothing different. And I think there's a potential with Starmer as leader, there could be worse.
Yeah, well, I mean, some people say, and have said consistently down the ages, really, ever since I joined the Labour Party, that, you know, the Labour Party, you know, a Labour government is always going to be somewhat better. Even a bad Labour government is going to be somewhat better than a Tory government. I mean, are you suggesting that isn't the case, that this could, a Starmer government could be even worse than a Tory government then?
I am. Not merely, you know, on policies and the fact that they're clearly offering nothing to people or the planet. You know, they're offering nothing. It's more. I think Labour's foreign policy could be worse. And I can talk a little bit about Starmer's background as the DPP to illustrate what I mean about his foreign policy. I think he could be Blair on steroids, really. But the worst of it all is that this is the opposition. This is what's supposed to give us an alternative in a democracy. Well, we're actually in a crisis of democracy because the Labour Party is offering nothing. And when people feel the continuing effects of the Labour Party doing nothing for them, what's going to happen after 5 years of that? In some ways, it's my belief that this Labour Party, and particularly given the stitch-up in selections, I mean, some awful people are being shoved into as prospective parliamentary candidates by Starmer, absolutely awful people. They could be sitting in Parliament for the next 30 or 40 years.
Sadly,
you know, and when that hopelessness goes on, where are the people going to turn? Where are they going to turn?
Well, we'll perhaps come on to that as we develop the conversation this evening. But just say a little bit, Becky, will you, about the sort of tactics then that the Stop Starmer campaign will be deploying then in the run-up to the general election?
Okay, well, we've announced we exist. There's going to be a launch meeting in London in early September. So that's be a face-to-face meeting with lots of speakers and hopefully lots of audience participation. And we're preparing materials so that people can do Stop Starmer stalls in their local areas, leaflets about why we need to stop Starmer, stickers, all the usual thing that you would have to run a campaign. And we would see these campaigns running alongside other socialist campaigns where there's independent candidates and so on and so forth.
Yeah. How did we get here then, Becky, in your opinion? We had one of the co-authors of this book. I don't know if you can see that, The Death of the Left.
Oh, yeah.
It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it, actually, to anybody who didn't watch last week's broadcast and have not come across this book. It is really good. It's a bit depressing, obviously, but it also offers some suggestions on how we can move forward, because the full title is The Death of the Left, Why We Must Begin from the Beginning Again. Sorry, I'm struggling to read this without my glasses. Why We Must Begin from the Beginning Again. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And in a sense, that's kind of what you're sort of doing, isn't it, with the launch of this? Well, not the formal launch, obviously, you just said is going to be in September, but this is about starting again, is it? Would you say? Yeah, that would be one way of characterizing what you're trying to achieve here.
I think it's definitely about starting again with representation, or parliamentary representation, of ordinary people, the many and not the few. It is about starting again. It is about recognising that the Labour Party has been very swiftly returned to being a party paid by big business, private health providers. I'm sure the armaments companies are in there somewhere. It's become hollow as a vehicle, really. It's a vehicle for the establishment.
Yeah.
Just as much
do you think,
Tory.
Do you said it's just returned to type, really, where it was before. Do you think that's all it's done, or would you say that it's gone even further? I mean, I'm just sort of thinking that in the past, even under Tony Blair, I mean, I survived under Tony Blair. Jeremy Corbyn survived under Tony Blair, maintained their position in the party, continued to argue for a different policy agenda, etc. That seemed to be tolerated. That doesn't seem to be the case now. So, is your opinion that it's simply gone back to where it was, or is it? Even it's a bit of a leading question, because I think it's gone worse. I mean, actually, now than it's ever been. But I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think that is a leading question, Chris. It is worse. It is worse, and I think that comes back to the history and the character of Keir Starmer, because he has been involved in, establishment politics since before 2008. He's not a new kid on the block. People think, oh, he got elected and isn't he smart or whatever. He's not a new kid on the block, and he's been working. He worked with the coalition government, worked very closely with David Cameron. He worked very, very closely in America. as head of the DPP. He set up an international section of the Crown Prosecution Service. So you would call that really British soft power. And he devised judicial packages for countries that Britain and America wanted the governments and the judiciary to be sort of knitted together under some pretense of, ooh, this is how you run a judiciary separately from government. But, you know, he has been globetrotting really since 2009.
Yes, indeed.
You know, so I think he is a person with a very specific agenda. I don't think he is a person with any principle. He's not a person. If you look at his track record, you know, I'm trying not to sort of just say, well, I think he hasn't got any principles. It's evident he hasn't got any principles because he couldn't flip-flop as fast, you know. And with regard to talking about him being incredibly authoritarian, you just have to look at what he did as DPP, what he did with protesters, what he did with the students protesting about tuition fees, what he did with writers after the murder of Mark Duggan, and how draconian he was. The fact that, you know, deaths that occurred at the hands of the police, even when coroners had ruled them unlawful killings, his CPS didn't prosecute anybody. We know that he played a very murky role in Julian Assange case.
Oh yes, absolutely.
A very murky role. It's mysterious how a lot of documents have disappeared from the CPS during the time of Starmer. And even today, that man, Andrew Malkinson, who was held for rape, 17 years, and now it emerges when the CPS under Starmer refused him an appeal in 2009. They knew they'd got extra DNA evidence.
They didn't do it. It's just disgraceful. Well, Matt Kennard asked some very pertinent questions, didn't he? He wrote an article about it some time ago, actually, when Starmer had recently been elected, or it might have been just before. It was either just before or just after, anyway. A range of questions about why, you know, his relationship with the security intelligence services, his relationship with the United States, the failure to prosecute intelligence operatives who were involved with torture, and as you mentioned, his role in Julian Assange. And he also asked him some questions about his involvement with the Trilateral Commission, that shady organisation that was concerned about an excess of democracy when it was established, which is why it was established, an excess of democracy in the 1960s, and that, you know, the democratic institutions and the institutions of the state were able to cope with people demanding their rights, as it were. And I'm not sure he's still a member of it, but he was for a long period of time, I think, several years. I think he was.
I think he's left it now, but very recently, you know, and that, in a sense, why would you join that? You know, Henry Kissinger is 60.
Precisely, rubbing shoulders with war criminals. It's appalling, really. I mean, and you know, and for an organisation that's concerned with an excess of democracy, and you're supposed to be, you know, involved with leading a democratic political party, it's a contradiction in terms, isn't it? But just going back to Stop Starmer then, and this movement that you're launching formally next month. Any response from the trade unionists, or any from any leading trade unionists, or formally, you know, more widely actually than that, you know, any trade unions per se that have expressed any support either informally or formally yet for it? Because I mean, I can't understand. I don't know what you think. Is why are the unions still associated with the Labour Party when they're actually working against the interests of working people? You know, I mean, it's just, I can't work it out.
and that's another long story, isn't it? Well, I can say to you, on our invite list to the launch in London, we have invited a number of people, and I doubt very much some of them would accept the invitation. I mean, I was at the Unite conference recently in Brighton. Now, I was there actually as an exhibitor, but there was a demonstration outside of Unite from Unite members protesting about the fact that Starmer had been invited to speak there. And inside the conference centre, any delegate that you sort of chatted to, they were furious. Yeah. So I didn't go into the hall. I just stayed on the ground floor and watched it on the screens. But it was like silence in there. It was saying all this, and then as soon as he finished, he was whisked off. The actual people, the delegates, well, firstly, they'd been told if you can't be polite, take an extra long lunch. So a lot of them weren't even in the hall. And those that were, you know, they'd been told you just stay polite, you sit quietly, and that's what they did. But I mean, you know, the delegates, ordinary union members know. Starmer's clear. He says we're the party business now.
Yeah.
He's not hiding anything. He hid things to be elected leader, but he's not hiding what he is now. And that's why, you know, he's just, you know, all the phrases, the B team, all this, that, and the other. I actually think Starmer is worse than the B team, just because of his background and his connections, you know, and what he's prepared to do, you know. And you know, like within the Labour Party, I mean, you and I, and probably people watching this show, know how awful things are in the Labour Party, how without any morality, without any sense of justice, and certainly with not a jot of kindness. You know, the Labour Party itself is filled with some dreadful, I'm not talking about the members, I'm talking about the parliamentarians and the bureaucracy. You know, it's an awful place. It's a completely racist place. We know this from Ford. And even Ford has been driven to speak out on Al Jazeera to explain what he found in the Labour Party. And
the Ford inquiry into the leaked report and so on. Yeah.
So really, any person of colour in Britain, they shouldn't touch Labour and Starmer with a barge pole. You know, we know that he said Israel is not an apartheid state. Well, come on, you know, it felt like, come on, you could try and dress it up in some way and say, oh, well, it's slipped a bit at the moment, but we'll soon get it back, which obviously would be a lie anyway. But to actually just say, no, it's not apartheid, when all these organisations across the globe and even Israeli generals are coming out and saying, oh, yeah, it's apartheid. And Starmer's there, no, it's not apartheid. I will always support Israel. You know,
well, he's a Zionist without qualification, he said, isn't he? You know, but do you think, Becky, that the Labour Party is salvageable? Because some people are still sticking with it. You think it's gone, do you?
No. I think the best we can hope for, really, in parliamentary terms, is that at the next election, we get some kind of hung parliament, and that there might be some kind of push to PR or something.
Well, we need that.
But yeah, and that the days, of supporting first past the post, which, I always used to think, one day we'll get, like we had with Corbyn, we'll get a Labour Party that's, moderately socialist. We'll win that election, and then we'll do all our socialist things. So that's good. Whereas if we had PR, you'd always having to be compromising and so on and so forth. Now, those days are gone. They are gone. And I think the best the left, can hope for is that we've got a hung parliament, and that those people supporting PR will maybe have some kind of sway. And the left has got to rebuild, but I don't think it will rebuild from like a top-down thing. We have got to continue to be out in our communities, in our groups, with our messages, on the picket lines, just moving forward with our message. And look, none of us thought that the Jeremy Corbyn thing would happen. Yeah. It won't happen again in the Labour Party. It's gone.
But it could happen maybe outside then, perhaps you
think. It happen outside the Labour Party. The Labour Party hopefully will shrivel on the vine. It's hollow anyway, so it might as well just shrivel off and die. And the sooner the better.
Well, that's been the fate, hasn't it, Becky? That's been the fate of the sort of equivalent Labour parties, in the continent of Europe. They call it the PASOKification of the Social Democratic Party. PASOK used to dominate in Greece, and it shrunk to, I think, about 5% of the vote. We've seen similarly, in France, the Socialist Party, so-called, they weren't really kind of Social Democrats, but anyway, I think they massively shrunk. But Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he managed to pull together a coalition of left groups, and I know they didn't win the election, but they deprived Macron of a majority at the parliamentary election after Macron kind of won the presidency by default. Because unfortunately, Mélenchon, as you recall, didn't make the cut. He just got below the threshold. They have the runoff between the two, so between Macron and the fascists, wasn't it? So he ended up kind of getting it by default. And maybe that, maybe the scope for the collaboration on the left in this country as well. I certainly hope so. I mean, what do you think the prospects are of that? Or do the prospects for an alternative party sort of coming through? I've joined the Workers' Party now, but I know there's a number of parties out there. We've got to, I believe, absolutely collaborate. But what do you think the prospects of that happening is likely to be?
I think the prospects are very, very good, because all these different groups at the moment, some maybe like the Workers' Party are seeking to be a national party, others like Liverpool Independents or Newham Socialists or whatever. People are finding what suits their community and their area, and people know the issues in their own areas. So I feel at the moment, different parties, independents, whatever, are going to have electoral success. They are going to have electoral success. And we've seen that in council elections. Labour has certainly not done as it should have done in local council elections. Far from it.
No, well, we had a program on Resistor TV actually a few weeks ago, and we got a couple of expert psephologists on, and they were analysing the local election results and where Labour are, and indeed the opinion polls for that matter, and where Labour are compared to where they probably need to be in order to secure even just a one-seat majority. And their analysis, anyway, was that it's well short. So even though the sort of headline opinion polls seem to suggest, and I mean, it might work out that way, a landslide victory for Labour, but what they seem to suggest, it looked more like it was heading into the sort of hung parliament territory. So you're absolutely right. We certainly did see some really astounding local election results, and hopefully that will translate. I mean, obviously the Tower Hamlets, where the new Aspire party under for Raymond, I mean, swept the board. It was fantastic, and then you mentioned Liverpool this on, and I mean that was repeated, quite a lot of locations, not everywhere, but certainly it was significant.
And to be honest, Chris, it's early days.
Yeah, of course.
It's early days, and so I believe there will be creeping successors. There is not the mood of 1996 going into 97.
No, nowhere near.
Nowhere near the mood. There was a mood then. And Starmer, whilst I believe him to be a deceitful and dangerous man, he's not as good an actor as Tony Blair.
No, that is for sure. He's had a charisma bypass.
Watch Tony Blair and think, oh my God, you should get an Oscar, because he was such a good actor.
Yeah, he was a good performer.
I remember the mood in 96. I remember the mood going into 97. And this is nothing like that. This is a lack of hope, a dismal, weary, British, grey, oppressive sky of a political environment.
I don't think, Becky, it's even, never mind the run into 97 in 96 and so on, I don't think it's even as optimistic, or anywhere near as optimistic indeed, as the run into 1992, where a lot of the expectations were that Labour would win, and then, as we know, John Major actually pulled off a shock result. So but I think people are kind of generally pissed off with all the political parties, aren't they, at the minute? To an even greater extent, that's my sense. The political class is kind of, very much. So I think they might have a very low turnout, unless we can inspire people with some of these new candidates, or maybe some new parties emerging that can actually get some traction. But did you say that you've got a date, Becky, for the launch, or is it you just know it's in September, you don't know the date for the launch of Stop Starmer?
Something like the 8th or 9th of September, whatever's the Saturday.
And will it be an invitation only meeting, or can anybody turn up to it?
No, it'll be an Eventbrite. So.
Okay, so people will be able to register to attend.
And we're arranging it so we can have not just endless speakers, but we're arranging it so that people in the audience will have an opportunity to contribute.
Right.
And we're organising it in different themes.
Yeah.
So, looking at themes like the economy and housing and what's happening in the NHS. So it's going to be looking at themes, looking at the paucity and the hollowness, and worse, the danger, the increasing privatisation and stuff that Labour's offering. So it will be organised in various themes with an expert to introduce it, and then audience participation.
Well, it sounds a really exciting the sort of event indeed that I hope that it didn't really come off actually. When Jeremy first became the leader, they were talking about organising a range of political, what do they call them now? Political assemblies, I think they were going to call them, around the country to talk about racism. There's one or two events happen, but it never really got going. I think John Trickett was going to lead it, but then he ended up, I think, getting sidetracked with parliamentary stuff, which I think was again a mistake. Although some of the stuff they were talking about on the economy was wrong-headed. Actually, I think John McDonnell was still boxed in by neoliberal thinking, to be honest. So I'm pleased that you're going to be having something along that. Where, in conclusion, then, can people sort of follow? I mean, assuming that Stop Starmer's got a presence on social media, has it? Or if it hasn't, yes, where can people follow you?
So the website is stopstarmer.co.uk. Fairly easy to remember. And the Twitter is stop_Starmer. There is an Instagram.
Everybody should. Oh, yeah, good. I can't do Instagram. I find it very difficult. It's for younger people, but it's good that you're going to be on there. Well, everybody definitely who's on Twitter then needs to follow stop_Starmer. I think it's been put up on the screen there. I think Gaz has put it up on the screen.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well done, mate. So that's good then. Well, listen, thanks so much indeed, Becky, for coming on. And the very best of luck with this initiative. It sounds really exciting, and definitely the launch event that you mentioned. It sounds absolutely spot on. It sounds like it's going to be a really interactive and interesting policy meeting in that sense. So that'll be good. So thanks very much for coming on.
I want to see everybody wearing a Stop Starmer t-shirt.
Great.
The merch is coming, Chris.
Brilliant.
The merch
Excellent.
is coming, the stickers are coming, the banners are coming.
Marvellous.
And
marvellous.
in a way, if you don't like Starmer, wear a Stop Starmer t-shirt.
Oh, that's great. I've got images, of what's his name, Quinton Hogg, in the 1964 general election when Labour were in the ascendancy, and a load of he was addressing an open air hustings meeting, and I don't know if you've seen this footage. There's a load of Labour supporters there, and they didn't have t-shirts, but they had like placards with Harold Wilson's photograph on them, and he absolutely lost his shit over it, and he got like a walkie stick and he's like bashing these signs like this, and I can just imagine people turning up to something with Stop Starmer. It would be just wonderful. So that's great. Yeah, really marvellous, wonderful news. Brilliant. Yeah. And those details presumably will be people able to get hold of those from the website and things like that, I would imagine.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the donation page is already working on the website.
Great.
So people want to donate.
Fantastic. That's really good. Listen, Becky, thanks very much for coming on tonight. All the very best, as I say, with the initiative.
Thanks for asking me, Chris. It's been great.
Yeah, great. No, we're really pleased that you've taken the time out to come and join us and talk about it. And obviously, we'll continue to promote it. And when we know the date, obviously, we'll give that a push as well. So thanks again, and thanks everybody for watching. Hopefully, we'll be back next week at the same time on Wednesday at 7 p.m. So until then, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now.